Local Women Magazine presents Local Women Podcast, the show for things that matter.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are listening, welcome. My name is Joanna Denton. I'm a business and leadership coach and a columnist at Local Women. And I'm also passionate about helping expert consultants step into their next career, the next step of their careers as they step into trusted advisor status. And today's guest is someone who does that absolutely brilliantly, and she's been doing it for years. But it's in a field where most of us wouldn't even think to look. So let me introduce her. Karen McShane is a chartered civil engineer. She's the immediate past president of the CIHT for 23 to 24. And for the last decade, she's been associate advisor to the Northern Ireland government organisation, the Strategic Investment Fund. She's also managing director of Karen McShane Limited, a transportation and civil engineering consultancy based here in Belfast. And she's worked on projects that shape how we move, how we build, and how we live. In this conversation today, we're going to talk about everything from what engineering even is, beyond the stereotypes, to how the entire industry is shifting away from designing around vehicles to designing around people. And when we do that, how does that shift society and retail and everything else? We'll talk about bridges, infrastructure, asking the so-called dumb blonde questions that actually shift entire projects, and what it takes to shift from being the smartest person in the room to a truly trusted and strategic advisor. It's going to be a powerful conversation about visibility, voice, business building, and shaping the world around us, and you are so welcome here. Let's get into it. So welcome, Karen, first of all. Thank you so much for coming today.
It's been a real pleasure to come in here today, Joanna. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm excited, but I tell you what, let's just start with some of the basics. Before we even start, yes, I said that you are a chartered civil engineer, but tell me, what does that mean? What do those words mean, and what is it that you do?
Chartered civil engineer. Well, that's a really good topic. Chartered, anybody that is chartered has gone through a professional examination. So we know about chartered accountants and people like that who maybe work for a few years and then they set a professional exam, which means that they get recognised by their professional institution. And then you can practice in my case, as a civil engineer. So that's the chartered element. But what is civil engineering? Everybody knows what an architect does. And they come up with some wonderful concepts about design, about things that will be changing our lives. The engineer is the person that comes in and makes that building stand up and makes that building actually work. So for example, when we go home in the evenings, we turn on our kitchen tap and the water comes out. And the architect will have specified a nice little sink in your kitchen. But how does that water actually get to the tap? So the civil engineer is the person that maybe brings those pipes from a reservoir. The reservoir is created somewhere to catch the rainwater. And likewise, when it goes down the plug hole, again, it just disappears. But there's a lot of infrastructure involved in taking that wastewater away. And it's quite controversial at the minute. There's lots of discussions about the capacity of our wastewater treatment works and the development of new houses. So all of those issues are things that a civil engineer would normally look at. From my day-to-day job, I very much deal with roads. People always call me Miss Pothole, and traffic and transport. And very much, I look at being the glue that ties together a lot of the other professionals. And we then try to solve some of those infrastructure issues that are coming together. My day-to-day job, it's everything from concept designs, maybe through a planning application, through the detailed design of a project. We might even write a contract document to bring a contractor on board to build something. And then we will supervise those works as they come through. And it's quite a varied and wide range of different subjects that we would look at. Personally, when I was at university, I studied everything from mathematics to geology, from fluid dynamics to cost estimation, to contract documents, to quantity surveying, to surveying, and a whole range of different topics. It was a 9-to-5 job, 5 days a week, going in, and every hour we had a different type of topic that we had to do. And what that does is it gives us a very broad understanding of lots of different topics without being a specialist in any one particular field, but we've got an understanding and awareness of lots of other things that come on board. So that's the civil engineer. It's the person that brings the glue to bring together all those other consultants and deliver the infrastructure that is required for all sorts of developments.
And it also strikes me that it's a lot of it's behind the scenes. It's not the glamorous stuff that people see of, oh, I'm building a new house and look at, the wonderful lines. It's actually, what I'm hearing is it's kind of everything from A to Z, but behind the scenes. I know you talk a lot about, the invisible stuff. It's the invisible elements and underestimated in some ways in terms of the expanse of it. But how did you even get into it? I mean, let's face it, this is not something that you kind of, well, I mean, I don't know. Is this something you've always wanted to do? What made you fascinated by this sort of idea of transportation, infrastructure, changing the world through doing that?
I think when I was at school, always had an interest in mathematics. Languages and me didn't really work very well, but mathematics was my first love, and I really was passionate about that. So I thought maybe I want to be an accountant. Maybe I'll go and do some work in an accountancy background.
Oh my lord! Oh my lord! Sorry, as a former tax accountant, I'm just okay. Fair enough.
So yeah, that was the aspiration. I was very fortunate. One of my teachers knew an accountancy firm. So sixth form school, we went along to work experience in an accountancy firm. And in those days, we didn't have computers. It was all done by hand and by calculators. And I went up into an attic room and sat down with about 25 accountants who were all sitting with their heads stuck in a ledger, adding up columns of numbers and doing tax returns. And I'm sitting going, how long have you been here? I've been here 5 years. And okay, how long have you been here? 3 years. And what else do you do? Oh no, this is what we do. And I looked around that room and I said, I always wanted to be an accountant. I don't think this is the profession for me. I want to do something where I can get outside. I want to do something where my day is going to be different from day to day. And we had a little checkbox form that we filled up in with our careers advisor at school. And you fill in a little pencil circle and it goes through and it reads into a number punch card machine. I think it was UCAS or something, and it comes out and it gives you a possible 3 different projections. So I think my 3 different projections were accountancy, a prison warden, or a civil engineer. So having gone for the accountancy work experience, I said, maybe I'll give this civil engineering a go and see what it is. And the thought process was I would go to university, I'll do a civil engineering degree. By all accounts, it's quite a broad degree. A lot of the people that do civil engineering, some of them go off and do different things. We've had people go to manage factories. We've had people go into the finance industry. A lot of people have gone overseas to work. But for me, I said, I'll do it for a couple of years until I decide what I actually want to do with my life. But every day, Joanne, every job's different. Yeah. Everything that I do, every project has its own unique challenges. And I really get enthused by having a challenge that I need to resolve. I get onto site, I get to meet different people, I get to make arguments about different things. And I've just enjoyed it so much that actually I've just stayed in the civil engineering profession.
So you've been doing this a while. I mean, you've been doing this a number of decades. I can imagine things have evolved a lot, not just within the industry, but also even the role of women within a traditionally masculine and male environment. So what have you seen evolve over time in your work and the projects that you've been doing and the things that you've got involved in?
Interesting question. When I was at university, there were around about 100 people on the course. There were 3 females in that room. So from an equality, diversity and inclusion point of view, we have really seen a massive shift. We've been able to encourage more ladies to come into the industry. It's not just about boys. It's not just about having mud on your boots. You can get out there and take on board quite a lot of management issues. My first projects, and I'm going to say over 35 years ago now, was designing a tanker wash for a margarine factory. Because whenever they washed out the tanker with all the grease, it used to congeal in the sewers and block everything up. So we developed this tanker wash, and it was actually for the W&R Barnet in the Harbour Estate. You remember your first kiss, you also remember your first project. My first job on site was building the foundation bolt boxes for Castle Court. So it was very much primarily just under construction at that stage. And then from that, I went on to actually do the remediation of a landfill site that had been built on a peat bog, and it was leaching into the river, causing problems. And the local authority had to basically build a reservoir around this landfill site to keep everything contained within that. And then from there, I moved into Charleshurst to do a car showroom. and Wallace Park in Lisburn to build a new road and car park through the parklands. The interesting thing in that project is one of our partners in the office had a photograph of the railings that had been around the park during the Victorian times. So this was our design brief. Can you replace these railings and gates in the same style as is on this photograph? And that was one of the challenges that we were able to do. But in those days, it was all done with pen, with paper, with calculators, scale rulers. It was all manually operated. And sort of as I came through my profession, we saw the introduction of computers. The first computer that our office purchased was £8,700. And all it did was added up numbers. And it was quite a bit different. Today, when we look at things, we have computers more powerful on our wrist than what we actually have on our desks in those days. We've seen the introduction of artificial intelligence coming forward. And one of the things that we have to be very cautious of is that the information that is putting out from the computers is only as good as the information that somebody has put into the system in the first place. So I'm very much of the understanding you have to understand the issues about what you're doing. And when my team bring a design to me, I'll look at that and say, that's wrong. And they look at me and say, but the computer says it's right. And I say, go and check it. And it turns out the decimal point was in the wrong place or something was wrong. And just having that experience allows things to develop. When we did, Fireside was one of the projects that I worked on, the design, the old Supermax store. And we took that down and we moved Upper Galwally. And a lot of that was done. We had about a year and a half to work on that. Today, the time frames are so much truncated. We really have to get through and get projects done very quickly. And when we're doing that, we really have to make sure that we're doing all our technical checks and making sure that everything is designed correctly. Because when you get to site, you don't want something wrong or having a mistake that really changes things. So we've seen a really good engagement in design processes. We've seen more management coming through and managing how those projects are done so that we can actually get them through on time and within budget.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing is that there's the element of we've seen that development in technology and those timeframes shifting, the way that we're designing, but fundamentally it comes back to we're solving human problems in the real world. One of the things that you mentioned when we were prepping for this is that there's also been this shift about historically, it was about moving cars and vehicles into the centre of town. Today, it's about human beings. But I'm curious as to how that shift in priority almost and focus also has a ripple effect to society around and everything else. Maybe, what were your thoughts on that?
Interesting, the movement of cars. From the Second World War in Northern Ireland, there was just under 100,000 vehicles registered in Northern Ireland. Today, there's 1.2 million. In the 1960s, we built the motorway network to deal with that 100,000 as it was rising to 200,000. Today, we're using exactly the same road network. Yes, there's been a few little additions, the A8, the A2, but primarily the 3,500 kilometres of roads that we have is the same roads that we had in those 1960s. When you look at those, there's things like the M1 motorway, which reaches capacity every morning and every afternoon, and we can't squeeze any more cars onto that piece of tarmac. One of the really good examples was the Upper Newtownards Road in Belfast. The Upper Newtownards Road had 2 lanes of traffic which were full of cars, and literally we couldn't squeeze any more cars into that. So the effect of that is we saw what we called the peak hour in the morning spread. So it started earlier, it ended later, and instead of being a peak hour, it became a peak 3 hours. And people changed their travel patterns because they couldn't get into that. So what we did and what the departments did is they worked with TransLink and they introduced what we call the glider service. So the glider service came on board, and those glider services that run every 7 minutes carry the same number of people that used to be in that lane of traffic. So we're still moving the same number of people. And if we were to double the frequency of that glider service, all of a sudden we could carry twice as many people along that corridor that we used to be able to do. So this is where the mindset comes of thinking about moving people rather than moving lumps of metal around our network. And what we're trying to do is to get people to think about their journey, get people to think about how they move. And by doing that, we can actually bring more people into city centres. And the knock-on effect of that, coming back to your question, is that generates more economic activity. It brings more people into our city centre and allows us to expand and to deliver better services than what we already have. We're starting to see the tower blocks arriving. The Oval Tower is probably the tallest building in Ireland still, but we have a lot of vacant plots left in Belfast city centre. We have a lot of spin-off from the end of the Second World War, where we have a lot of car parks that were left as vacant sites for redevelopment. The council has taken those over. They're redeveloping those and putting out design briefs to bring forward redevelopment. We've seen taller buildings arriving in our city centre. And all of a sudden, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I remember the Ring of Steel. There were 2 people lived in the city centre. And now there's an aspiration to bring hundreds of thousands of people into the city centre to enjoy all those services and to feed the economic activity in our city.
You know, what really strikes me when listening to you, back to your point in terms of, from the study and getting this broad understanding of lots of topics, this is not just a question. I mean, right at the start when you were explaining what a civil engineer was, you talked about the fact that it's kind of getting the water to the tap and getting the sewage back out and everything, but there's so many different moving parts here. What I want to ask you about is that, as a consultant, we all know there's consultants that like the sound of their own voice and they like to be the smartest person in the room. But the job that you do, the job that I do, the strategic advisor piece is so much more than just knowing a bunch of stuff. It's about really being able to guide that conversation. And it did make me laugh when you said you like to ask the dumb blonde question. For me, it's the Columbo question. It's like just one more thing. But maybe how do you approach these conversations and kind of make sure that you leave all that ego in the corner, that you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, but you're there to aid and guide and help your clients get to the best possible outcome?
One of the issues that we have is when you think about group mindset, if we have a particular sector of people sitting around the table and making decisions, if they are all from the same background, they will see things differently than maybe a different diverse group. If we start to mix up those diverse groups and have different people with different backgrounds, different experiences sitting in the room, we start to develop a more unique solution that satisfies the problems for lots of people. And one of the examples is when we were walking through a square, London, a firm in London did a bit of research on people walking through a square. When a man walks through, they put a virtual headset on him and they watched his eye pattern as to what he was doing when he was walking through. And he looked straight at the exit and he walked to the exit. When we put that headset onto a lady who walked through the same space, the travel pattern was completely different. They were constantly looking to the left, looking to the right, looking behind them and looking at the bushes and looking what was there. And they were surveying the whole area rather than just going through. Now, whether that's from a safety aspect, from a lighting aspect, or from just their own personal safety, it really showed us that you need to have different people from different diverse backgrounds onto a team to create that unique design solution. From my point of view, we have a manual called the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges. Sounds very technical. It's referred to as the DMRB. I used to have a paper copy and it occupied a shelf in my office and it was constantly being updated. And it's what we call the standards for engineering for designing a road. And I know quite a lot about that. But what I suddenly realised, whenever I act as an expert witness in court, when I go to a planning appeal, when I'm sitting on a design team, the rest of the people in the room don't care what the DMRB signs. They're worried about what's the planning policy, what's the environmental policy, what's the economic policy. And I had to know about all these policies in order to create an informed view of making a decision. And I think that's what sets some of us apart from other engineers. We've got that diverse thinking about what we can do to create a better solution that will satisfy a lot of these issues. And when I was looking for a career change after about 25 years of working for a multinational company, I wanted to go and work for myself, but I also applied for an advisor role with the Strategic Investment Board. And I was very fortunate. They handed me a role on a temporary basis, and I looked after a few projects. I'm still working on projects like the Lissanelli Education School Campus, the 5 schools into one. I'm doing a little bit of work with the Air Ambulance at the minute on behalf of the Strategic Investment Board, and plenty of other projects. But what it does is when I'm sitting in those projects, when I'm sitting on a board, when I'm sitting in a room with other designers, somebody said to me, somebody's paying for you to be there. So don't sit on your hands and do nothing. Listen to what people are saying. There's no such thing as a stupid question. So if there's something that you don't understand, ask the unbelonged question and get up and say, actually, what is this or what is that? Because you'd be surprised at how many other people in the room don't know that. And the second reason for doing it is because I've got a varied experience. I've been working for lots of decades and seen lots of things. I've seen things go wrong. I've learned from those. So if there's something going along in this particular project, I'll get up and say, actually, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? I know this is where your brief is, but have you considered this aspect of it? And it just brings that slightly different thinking into it. And sometimes all it takes is somebody to make that prompt and get people thinking about and talking about maybe an alternative solution, which may save the client money and may produce a better outcome.
I love it. Listen, we're going to start to kind of wind up, but I want to kind of end with a final question, which is this. If you had 60 seconds with policymakers and investors, what would you challenge them to think about or do differently?
That's a very difficult question. There's so many possibilities of what we could do. I think one of the things for me is we have our own legislative assembly. We're making our decisions. Sometimes those decisions aren't made quickly enough. We spend too much time talking about things rather than getting on and making a decision and moving forward. When we look at our infrastructure, we have a thing called a local development plan. Each of our local councils has been tasked with producing a local development plan. For me, those aren't detailed enough. They're identifying sites for development, for new conurbations, new housing developments, but they're not looking at the infrastructure requirements. And then when somebody puts in a planning application, we find that there isn't water supply, there isn't sewerage capacity, there isn't a transport link, etc., etc., etc. And we really need to be setting out those initiatives. The likes of Liverpool Council, they've just built a suspension bridge to open up lands for new development, and they prime funded that, and they're charging that on to the developers as they come forward. So that suggests to me we need to think differently about how we fund some of our solutions, and we need to be looking forward as to how we can get the best and sweat our assets. We have lots of government departments. We have lots of different departments looking at different things. How can we actually save money and streamline some of those resources and produce answers quicker, better, and more efficiently?
I want to say thank you so much for your time today and talking about this. What I'm hearing at the end of the day is that engineering is more than just concrete and cars. It's about human problems, solving human problems in real life and finding ways to be quicker and better and more efficient in doing so. So on that note, I'm going to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are listening to this. This has been Joanna Denton and Karen McShane signing off for now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Local Women Magazine presents Local Women Podcast, the show for things that matter.